Welcome, my name is Katie Wernimont. I am a graduate student at Morningside College. This is my 15th year teaching middle school. I currently teach in Eastern Iowa in a 6th grade reading and language arts classroom. This is a presentation on my research study of the effects of morphological problem solving on academic vocabulary in middle school classrooms. According to the National Assessment of Educational Progress Report for Vocabulary Results from 2009 to 2011, there is a connection between the performance on reading comprehension and vocabulary test scores in 4th and 8th graders. Students who were performing in the lower percentiles for reading comprehension were also performing in the lower percentiles for vocabulary. The same was true of data for students from higher percentiles in reading comprehension. These students also had higher percentile rankings in vocabulary. Since the NAEP started measuring reading achievement in 1992, the nation's 4th and 8th graders have shown little to no growth. According to the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, the 5 components of reading students need in order to become proficient readers are comprehension, fluency, phonemic awareness, phonics, and vocabulary. Students need to master all of these components in order to become proficient readers in academic texts that middle school students are expected to read daily. I chose this topic since my students tend to struggle with vocabulary, and I wanted to investigate what might have an impact on students and help them well when they encounter unfamiliar texts. This relates to middle school students since the Common Core State Standards has a language standard for middle school students to clarify the meaning of unknown words by using Latin or Greek roots and affixes as clues to determine the meanings of unknown words. These are standards that all students are expected to meet and master before leaving 8th grade. This is what I found in a review of the literature surrounding morphological problem solving and vocabulary. One part of vocabulary is morphological awareness. Morphology is the study of the form of words. Students need to be able to identify roots, bases, and affixes of a variety of words to develop a strong morphological awareness. Young readers use morphology and literacy early on, finding out how adding a suffix like ful can change the word hand to handful. Teaching roots and affixes allows words to be taught in clusters or word families rather than learning all of the words in isolation. Morphological problem solving is the analysis of unfamiliar words found in context. You look at the affixes, the prefixes or suffixes, as well as what the root of the word is. You combine these together to make new words to help you understand and decipher the context in which you found them. All of the research I found focused on vocabulary relates back to a study done by Nagy and Anderson. They found that 60% of words that middle school students encounter are morphologically complex. In 2000, Cox had published a list of 570 academic word families that make up thousands of words students encounter in academic content areas. This creates an enormous amount of words that students would need to know to read various texts proficiently. It has been suggested that the more extensive and wide variety that students read, the greater the range of vocabulary that students encounter. The more text that students encounter gives them an opportunity to learn more words and meanings. Goodwin suggests that morphological instruction that is integrated within a reading comprehension strategy can increase the vocabulary scores of students. An understanding of morphological awareness can help in selecting instructional activities of roots and affixes to support the word learning. A study conducted in 2013 suggests that students use a wide variety of strategies to figure out the meaning of morphologically complex words. This study found that when students used morphological awareness to understand how parts of a word fit together, it helped readers to make sense of the affixes or prefixes and suffixes, to spell words from word families, pronunciation, as well as grammar to identify how suffixes can change the parts of speech. A study conducted by Carlisle in 2000 suggests that more studies need to be completed to determine what successful components of morphological problem solving are to be used in interventions. The purpose of this study was to determine the impact of direct instruction and guided practice of morphological problem solving to improve academic vocabulary in middle school students. My hypothesis was that students that receive instruction in morphological problem solving would show scores higher on vocabulary achievement assessments. My independent variable was the instruction of morphological problem solving, and the dependent variable was the student assessment result. Since vocabulary seems to be a never-ending discussion in my school district, the possible impact of my study would be to use the results in decision-making and vocabulary instruction. This will also impact whether or not I continue to use morphological problem solving for vocabulary instruction in the future. The next section of my study I would like to discuss is the methodology. This study had participants who were 10 to 12 years old in 6th grade classroom enrolled in a reading class in eastern Iowa. The school that was used has 42% of the population receiving free or reduced lunch. The demographic makeup of the school is comprised of 70% white, 25% African American, and 5% of other populations, mainly Marshallese. The school is comprised of approximately 642 students, with 189 being enrolled in the 6th grade. None of the students that participated in this study were on an intervention or individual education plan. 3 of the participants received a little bit extra support for English language learner. A computer system randomly assigned students to the class taught by the researcher. The control group was made up of 15 participants, and the experimental group contained a total of 19 students. All of the ELL students were in the experimental group. None of the participants received an incentive to participate. The measurement testing tool used from Pearson was called the GRADE, the Group Reading Assessment and Diagnostic Evaluation. The form used was for 6th grade, and the participants were given 2 different versions, one for a pretest and one for a post-test. Another teacher in my building scored these tests for me for both of the groups and both tests. The assessment consisted of 40 multiple choice questions, each containing a vocabulary word that was grade appropriate. The ITP, or Iowa Test of Progress, was also administered to all of the participants in the study at the end of the intervention. The ITP consisted of 39 questions, and students had a time limit of 15 minutes to complete the multiple choice test. This assessment had roughly the same amount of vocabulary words as the grade assessment and takes about the same amount of time to complete. The intervention began in the fall of 2016, and all of the students were administered the grade pretest. The study was set up for an A-B design, with the experimental group receiving instruction on morphological problem solving twice a week for 8 weeks. The first week, participants in the experimental group received direct instructions on how to break down words into morphemes. Then they had time to practice breaking familiar words into recognizable morphemes. For weeks 2 and 3, instruction focused on Latin and Greek prefixes and what happens to words when they are added to the roots. Students worked in stations using graphic organizers to help determine the prefix meaning, concentration matchup game between the prefix and word, as well as reading text to find words with prefixes. During weeks 4 and 5, participants in the experimental group received instructions on the Latin and Greek suffixes. Activities done during this time were using suffixes to create adverbs and adjectives, as well as identifying various verb tense. For weeks 6 and 7, participants were directed instructively on Latin and Greek roots. Participants worked on determining the meaning of words using the roots, as well as created word webs of new words by adding the prefixes and suffixes to the words. During the last week, participants tried to create words by combining the affixes with the prefixes and suffixes to roots or different bases. At the end of Week 8, all students were administered the grade vocabulary test as the post-test. The next week, all of the participants were also administered the Iowa Test of Progress. The mean and standard deviation for both the pre-test and post-test from the grade assessment given to all participants was analyzed. Students in the experimental group showed an average increase in their national percentile rank of 7%, where the control group showed an average decrease of 4%. What does the data say about this study? The results did not show a difference within groups. This shows you the results of the control and the experimental group with the grade pre-test and post-test. The control group scored a mean of 20.87 with the standard deviation of 4.24 before the treatment, and after the treatment a mean of 18.13 with a standard deviation of 5.61. The experimental group scored similarly before the mean with 18 and a standard deviation of 5.61. After the treatment, a mean of 20.58 with a standard deviation of 5.79. The results showed a slight difference in the experimental group, with an increase in the mean from the initial score to the end score with an average of 2.5 points, while the control group actually decreased their average. What are the implications, limitations, and recommendations of this study? Implications. Students were introduced to a new strategy to use when they encounter unfamiliar words and contexts. Students had to practice and were able to explore and ask questions for clarification. A limitation of this study was the grade assessment itself. I was informed the night before the study was to launch that I needed to have a pretest and a post-test, not just look at data from the ITP, which had been approved already. One of our special needs teachers was able to pull an assessment for my participants to take. The assessment was not representative of morphological words of Latin and Greek origin and did not represent 60% of the words they encounter. A different testing measure might have shown more accurately if the intervention was effective for Latin and Greek morphemes. Time was another limitation. Students did not have a very strong knowledge of Latin or Greek roots and affixes. Teaching the process of morphological problem solving was not as effective if students did not have the prefixes, suffixes, or roots to look for and know what they meant when they tried to apply them in new context. This study only looked at the 6th graders and did not include any of the other grades in the middle school. The recommendations that I have. Using a larger sample size would give you more of an idea whether this intervention is successful to help students in learning vocabulary. Teaching this intervention in classes other than a reading classroom could help students see the value and help students to apply reading strategies to other content areas where they may encounter unfamiliar words in the text. The last recommendation that I have is to continue the research for a longer period of time. Students need to be familiar with the Latin and Greek roots and affixes in order for them to have a base to draw on when figuring out unfamiliar words that they encounter in text. This study could also be done at lower grade levels to be learned alongside of morphemes and word families that students are exposed to when learning how to read. Thank you.